Oh, for more on this, I am joined in studio by the Gauteng Premier spokesperson, Mr. Sizwe Pamla. Thank you so much for joining us. A good evening to you. It's been a long day, I can imagine, so thank you for coming into the studio for us. I mean, a lot of data that we heard today, but I do want to start with the issue of the timing of the release of this information by the Premier, especially after so much pressure from the Democratic Alliance. Is that the reason why we're seeing these reports being released?
No, not at all. I think what people forget is the fact that this commitment was made in the State of the Province Address of 2023. That Premier himself, in fact, the Premier was appointed in October 2022. 13th of December, which was 2 months after he was appointed, he released all of the reports that were there, which was 3 of them. And then after that, he went on to deliver the State of the Nation address, State of the Province address in February. He made this commitment to say, look, all of the reports that are sitting on my desk, as soon as they arrive, I will make them publicly available. The fact that political parties have been impatient, we can only attribute that to impatience, is understandable because they were hoping that, of course, there's something that they can extract from those reports. But the reality is that the Premier made this commitment in 2023, and he has been very consistent to say, what we are going to do with these reports is that we are going to handle them with care. The people's details that are there have to be respected. And that also we need to remind people, just because we are accused of a crime doesn't mean we are guilty. We can't start to demonize the accused. We need to hold accountable the guilty, which is why then all of the processes needed to be respected. And the 47 reports that have been made available is because all of those processes, legal challenges and other processes have been finalized.
I think you call it impatience on the part of opposition parties, but they, of course, could be the argument that some of these matters go as far back as a decade, right? And that it's incredibly important to be able to get to the bottom of probes that need to be looked at in the public sector and provincial government, even before you have, for instance, a changing of the leadership wheels, right? That South Africans need to have the confidence that where there is maladministration, for instance, that there's speed to deal with it.
Look, it's a conversation we can have because firstly, let's clarify, these reports were actually submitted by Chapter 9 and Chapter 10 institutions, which means government departments were not investigating themselves. Now, whether the capacity of these institutions that we're talking about is of such a nature that they can be able to meet the expectations in terms of turnaround, we can have that conversation. We've been talking about the fact that some of these institutions need to be funded. But all of the reports that have been submitted have been made available. And the Premier has also reiterated the fact that even the outstanding ones, he's not holding on to them for any other reason except the fact that there are processes that are still being finalized. As soon as those processes are final, he will make them available.
Talk to me about the levels of those that we are finding need to face disciplinary processes, right? And I'm talking about just how far up the ranks it is they go. I know that you may not be able to give me too much detail on some of their identities, but incredibly important on just how much power we're talking about here where there is some questionable action.
Well, when you look at some of the issues that are contained or that were actually investigated, you talk about people who have the power of signatures in terms of actually procurement. So it's not really going to be the lowly people at the bottom end of the bureaucratic structure. It's going to be people who have had the powers to sign some of the documents. But look, the reality is that all across, if you look at what has happened so far, I mean, in the last report, I think it's the Anglo-Ashanti, a CEO of a hospital was actually held accountable and dismissed. So it means that what we have seen so far with the reports that have been released and the action that has been taken is that everyone at all levels has been subjected to the process, and many of the people who are found guilty have been held accountable, irrespective of their position or the positions that they actually hold.
Yeah, timeframes that you give to MECs as the Premier's office for them to start the disciplinary processes?
No, in fact, the reports, there's 47, they are in various stages of actual implementation of the recommendations. So if you look at what that statement says, it says that 55 cases, criminal cases, have already been opened. It says 88 people have already been subjected to disciplinary processes. What we need to understand is the fact that not all of the investigations actually have come out with recommendations that say people have to be held accountable. Some of them have actually just come out to say, look, maybe you need to revisit some of your processes to say they are vulnerable and maybe they are not tight enough to actually stop some of the... For example, let's just look at something like a person using a car without authorization. That is a case that needs to be investigated. We are not going to really go to the length of saying that there's anything that needs to be done except to just firstly hold that individual responsible, accountable, but also look at the supervisory mechanisms that are in place to say, why is it that people are able to get away with some of these things? Which means not every case results in someone either being subjected to a court process or to a disciplinary hearing. In some situations, it's just a question of actually tightening some of the supervisory systems that are currently in place.
You know, I'm always keen to hear when we have lifestyle audits that take place, I mean, it is part of this crackdown. You've got the provincial government removing provincial heads of departments. This is after their failure of lifestyle audits. What is it that you find in a lifestyle audit? And I think this is just a question for the curiosity of many South Africans that says, okay, there is something that's concerning.
Look, you know that lifestyle audits are actually conducted by Chapter 9, Chapter 9 institutions. In fact, SIU is the one that conducts lifestyle audits. Look, we don't have a framework of what is it that they look for. What they do, though, is that they look at the audit findings and they ask for particular documents to substantiate in terms of explaining some of the wealth that you have and look at whether what you currently have, does it really make sense considering your sources of income and all of that. But I can't delve into the minutiae and the detail in terms of what is it, but what I can tell you is that they do have a system in place where they look at the audit findings and they look at your submissions and reconcile them if they are not reconcilable. And then, of course, they put out their findings out there.
So, okay, I was looking for, you know, the details of, you know, the vehicles and that sort of, because that's the curiosity of many South Africans.
It's a lifestyle. That's why I'm saying, to say, look, it's just a question of whether can you explain the wealth or not even the wealth.
Understood.
In terms of just the lifestyle that you currently have, whether can you explain the source of the assets that you currently have.
It's a curiosity. It's a curiosity. The SIU, though, a little bit earlier this year, finding that 37% of senior officials in the provincial government were failing lifestyle audits. I mean, that's a substantial amount. Just moving forward, the kind of communication that provincial government then has with its own officials around some of these issues, especially when you know that now we're tracking the data, South Africans will come back and want to get answers. Actually,
on that statistics, what has since happened is that some of those officials, look, sometimes when these reports come out, it's just a question of people having failed to submit necessary reports. So they are given a second chance to say, look, this is what the report says. Do you think you can actually correct this? And if they think they can, and then they are given an opportunity to go out there and make those submissions or actually give a clarification and explanations. Those that have failed, as the Premier said earlier this morning, to say, I think of the remaining 4 heads of departments, only 3 were given an opportunity, and they've so far failed to actually make the necessary submissions, which means they've failed. There are processes ongoing where they are going to be subjected to some kind of an internal process. So at the right time, the GPG will be able to release that information. Okay, I know that we're almost out of time, but I need to squeeze this one in because hard to ignore. The Joburg mayor has survived a motion of no confidence. We know that earlier on this week he did have a meeting with we'll say ANC leader in the province, but also I know you're speaking for him as the Premier. But any sense from the Premier's office on how they're feeling about what came out of council? No, that is above my pay grade. I think the Premier is better placed to actually. But it certainly speaks to whether or not you have faith in the stability of the metros in the province. No, if you look at the role that the provincial government has played so far in terms of just stabilizing them and assisting them at all levels, you remember that we had a turnaround summit where we invited all of the municipalities. You can go back to the issue of electricity in terms of how the province has managed that challenge. It has convened all of the municipalities to be able to find sustainable solutions. You can look at the issue of water. So As far as the provincial government is concerned, there are actually systems in place in terms of assisting the municipalities. Of course, all of those systems are going to be tested depending on the problems that are on the ground and also on the stability of these municipalities. These motion of no confidence actually are just not helpful overall, because at a time when you think you are starting to develop systems and then people are just coming in and interfering with the processes, but that's the democracy we signed up for. But as to whether the provincial government has a plan in terms of assisting municipalities, the answer is yes. Politically, as to what the Premier thinks of the motion of no confidence, I'll leave that to the Premier to respond.
Drawing a clear line there.
Yes.
We do appreciate your time. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Sizwe Pamla, of course, is the spokesperson for the Gauteng Premier. Sizwe Pamla.